Welcome everyone to Avid Idealogy, a collaborative ideas platform powered by SR. This monthly series isn't just going to be about passive conversations where speakers talk and audiences listen. The speakers are handpicked as a mix of thinkers and practitioners who bring something old and something new to the table. On stage, what you will get to witness is a live insights session, combining the best knowledge in the field from India and around the world. You, the audience, are also very important in this mix. And post the talk, we actively encourage you to question and debate with the speakers with your point of view. Our only mandate at Avid Idealogy being to facilitate new insights to fly and be born in real time while having fun. Every month, we will bring you a different session on topics ranging from design to development, from fashion to finance, technology to mythology and beyond. And since one of the defining soft powers of India is cinema, our first scheduled event today is titled The Future of Cinema, Where the World Meets India. Bringing to the table an academic, cognitive theory, film festival, and new frontiers of cinema point of view is the head of International Development, Faculty of Media, Arts and Technology at the University of Gloucestershire, UK, Dr. Tico Romao. Balancing the academic with the realistic, with experience in film marketing, media production, and operations, especially digital formats across the globe, is Managing Director, Content Acquisition and Distribution at Film Caravan from LA to Mumbai, Pooja Kohli. And rounding off with a mentoring, teaching, censoring, documentary production, and holistic worldview on cinema is our moderator for the evening, former head of Department of Social Communications Media at the Sophia Polytechnic, Mumbai, Professor Jeroo Mulla. While we were curating this series, our team at Avid wanted to partner with an offbeat creative space in Mumbai, and we're very happy to be here at Blue Frog, which in itself is one of the most innovative live entertainment spaces that India has recently seen. Thanks to Srila, Tina, Camille, and the entire Blue Frog team for all their support. We believe that the innovation curve from every field can contribute or feed into another. We believe it's time we stopped compartmentalizing arts and culture versus business and governance. We believe it's time they mixed up to stimulate real actionable change. And since the lights are on, the camera is rolling, I now call on Jeroo to begin the action.
Thank you, Sabina. Welcome, everyone. And I'm really looking forward to this discussion. We already had a slight preliminary session yesterday, and we were all very excitedly talking about and exchanging ideas, and I hope some of that excitement will rub off onto all of you. It's going to be a 4-part presentation, largely created by Dr. Tico Romao, and we're going to have interventions by Pooja, and we're going to balance the academic with the realistic. So the first, the presentation is divided off into 4 parts, and we're going to have interactions at the end of every part, and then at the end, we're going to have about half an hour of a question-answer session. So, Dr. Tico Romao, could you begin by telling us about the impact of globalization on the Hollywood and Bollywood industries, maybe first with Hollywood, and to what extent Hollywood big-budget films are dictated by the demands of the Asian market? We know that you have a lot of data, so could you share that with us and elaborate on that?
Certainly. So what I plan on doing, and with regard to these questions and more broadly in terms of the presentation, is I'm going to be doing a bit of crystal ball gazing. And I'm a film historian by background. And what film historians tend to do is that they really look for 3 things. They look at continuity, they look at change, and they look at emerging patterns. And so really to get an understanding of what the future is, you really have to have an eye towards those three things. So some of the things I'm going to be going through relate to that. So the first graph that I want to show you, and then this is directly relates to the point of globalization, is these are patterns of box office trends roughly from 2002 to 2013. You might not be able to see the detail, but the key thing is what these patterns are. First of all, in terms of the English-speaking world, in terms of the United States, there has been a steady decrease to a stabilization of box office revenues. The flip side of that is that where markets are actually growing is in Asia and principally China. So the green line, if you're possible to see it, represents Asia, and I think the orange line represents Asia, and the green line represents China. So those are the big growing areas, and Hollywood is aware of that in particular, and that has a huge impact upon how films are made. So to get a really good understanding of how films are going to be developed into the future, you really have to see what the drivers are in terms of the Hollywood industry. And the drivers of the Hollywood film industry are its blockbusters. So what I'm going to do is going to very quickly do a bit of number crunching, which will demonstrate how important is the overseas market. And later what we're going to be looking at is what is the impact upon that with regard to the film text itself. So what we have first is Avatar, the biggest grossing film. It earned $2.7 billion worldwide. 72% of that was overseas. We turn to the Titanic, second biggest grossing film, $2.1 billion earned, with 69% of that overseas. We turn to number 3, the Marvel Avengers, another recent film, $1.5 billion earned, and with 59% of that generated overseas. These are all box office figures from theater exhibition. It doesn't even touch what later in the value chains in terms of Blu-ray, satellite deals, things of that nature. Number 4 is Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the second installment. That was $1.3 billion, 7.1% of that generated overseas. And finally, Iron Man 3. This is really surprising. This is not a strong film. $1.2 billion generated, with about 60% overseas generated. Now, what is important about that is just how much of that money is being generated in terms of overseas, but I think that we also see some emerging patterns. First of all, where most of the revenues are being generated is in Asia. So we're talking about Japan, we're talking about China, less so in India, and even Russia is becoming a huge emerging market. We're also looking at that really the blockbuster is the staple feature of this. They rely on formulas, they rely on franchises, sequels, because Hollywood is inherently conservative and they really want to know a known quantity. The other additional dimension of this pattern emerging is that these films tend to be principally CGI driven, and what they're relying upon is science fiction films, fantasy films, and principally as of late, there really are comic book adaptations. And also in addition, they cater towards a younger age bracket, the people who consume comic books. All right. What is the pattern in terms of Bollywood films? And so what I've done, I've identified the top 3 Bollywood box office films in terms of theatrical exhibition. So the first one is Doom 3. It generated 91 million worldwide. 51% of that was overseas. Then we return to Chennai Express, the second biggest grossing Bollywood film. That generated 79 million worldwide, and with 54% of that generated overseas. And finally, and surprisingly, Three Idiots is the third biggest box office hit in terms of Bollywood. It generated 67 million worldwide, with about 48% of that overseas. So what's the emerging pattern for this? First of all, and this is actually opposite to Hollywood films, they are focused upon overseas and a global market, but it's actually principally catering towards the broader Indian diaspora. So we're talking about Indian populations in the United States, in the UK, and in Australia and Canada. And that's where a lot of this revenue is coming, including the domestic within India. And also, even though we didn't see it as much as in terms of the American Hollywood films, there is an increasing reliance upon sequels, about franchises, and the adoption of that model. And finally, and what I really found interesting is that tends to be more of a generic mix of what is going on in terms of the top Bollywood films. There are some action films there, there's some science fiction films as well, but one also sees coming-of-age films, one sees more romantic comedies that are mixed in with action films. So there tends to be a generic mix, much more so than what we find in terms of Hollywood blockbusters, which are really principally CGI fantasy films. So I have two predictions, given that my job here is to make predictions, and I'll turn over to the panel to discuss. And my first prediction is that with regard to Hollywood cinema, I think that we will continue to see that the Hollywood blockbuster will be primarily a vehicle for CGI fantasy films. I don't think we've hit the ceiling of what CGI and visual effects can do about exploration of possible worlds. So that's my first prediction. And my second prediction in terms of Bollywood films is that I think what we will see, and this already is happening, an increasing interpenetration of American culture with Indian culture, and that you're getting this real hybrid, which caters to the worldwide diaspora, Indian diaspora, but also I think it also caters to the Indians who live in the major metros, who go to the cineplexes and engage in that culture. So over to you.
Yeah, I think we can certainly see the effects of that with something like Doom 3, which I think you're going to show a trailer of, where definitely you see all those kind of special effects and, the kind of things that we saw in Avatar in a different way, in a very, strong way. So certainly special effects is big. Reliance is also getting into special effects in a big way. Many companies are investing. So I kind of tend to agree with you. But at the same time, I feel the more that we're pushing in that direction, we're also going to get what we're going to talk about later, other people making more and more experimental films, more avant-garde films, and so on. So I think we're going to have both ends of the spectrum. Pooja.
Thank you. I don't know if this is on. All right. Thank you. That was a very quick synthesis. I'm going to ask you to read my palm after this. I think in terms of the Hollywood, I sort of agree. The bigger films will always eat up 80% of your advertising or the market share. But I also see that these films are actually going to become events. They're just going to become bigger than just films. We've already seen that with 3D cinemas. And so in terms of like just building and the marketing that goes behind them is as important as the content of the film. So I see that emerging as a very big trend with the Hollywood cinema, that, these brands of films that they're doing are less about content and it's more about going out there to immerse yourself in that experience. So I'm sure there's going to be moving seats one day in this 3D theater. In terms of Bollywood, while we look at the pattern, and I agree that the top 10% of the films that we make always try to replicate the pattern of Hollywood, because that's where your star power is and your big studios back, and therefore you have the numbers to generate from here. They also get the distribution internationally that can guarantee a 67 or a 91 million. But one of the trends that I've sort of seen in the past, and independent is definitely one, thanks to Cannes, Toronto, Venice, you know, having entries from India every year. But also something in mainstream Bollywood, I've seen small towns, whether it's Delhi or Calcutta, being featured as characters. So if you see Kahani, Calcutta is a very strong character in that, or you see Vicky Donor or Khosla Ka Ghosla. These are small characters in the film, in addition to the characters from that town that the cinema is bringing to us, which is pretty new for a lot of us. And being small films, they actually exceed expectations. Or Queen, for that matter, recently did the same thing.
Yeah. So would you like to talk about the effects of globalization on the narratives, or you want to make another comment? Yeah.
Absolutely. So one of the things I think is important to bear in mind is that, yes, we see how globalization really drives the Hollywood and Bollywood industries, but what is the actual effect in terms of what I would say the textual properties of the films? That what is in terms of what the film means, how the film actually looks in terms of its design. And so the only way that we really could do that is to see some clips. So what I'm going to do is show you a trailer for Godzilla, which I'm sure that you're aware of, received about 93 million worldwide in its opening screening, which is huge. So let's take a look at the trailer, and I think it illustrates a lot of the points that we've just made.
All right, let's make this quick.
Sandra, you there?
Joe, there's been a breach.
Keep the doors open. My wife is still in there.
Joe, it's too late.
They evacuated us so quickly. You know, I did everything I could. It was not a natural disaster, all right? What's really happening is that you're hiding something out there. And I have a right to know! So, run! Run!
Many of you have family and loved ones still in the city, and that you want to help them. Well, this is your chance.
You have no idea what's coming, and it is going to send us back to the Stone Age!
Experience it in IMAX 3D, May 16th.
So the trailer itself should, there may be some of you have seen the film. I'm assuming that it opened in Mumbai, is that right? Has anybody, by show of hands, has anybody seen the film yet? Oh, a couple. So what are the key things to think about Godzilla? Well, the first thing that we should note is that, again, what we're seeing is that the principal source of income for Hollywood is on these blockbusters. It was released during the May weekend in the States. May is a very pivotal window, and this is when Hollywood releases these types of films. And so it has to have all the elements of what a blockbuster is. The second component of it is that really what you're seeing is a CGI special effects extravaganza. This is this film does not focus upon story. There is definitely that it's there, but what drives the spectators to see this film is just seeing Hollywood raise the bar in terms of what they're able to do with visual effects. And as Hollywood does, they rely on their blockbusters on formula. That could be generic formula, but really what they like is known quantities. So as you know, we always said Godzilla was initially a Japanese horror film. There was a reboot of that in 1998 by Roland Emmerich, which used let's say, earlier CGI technology, and Hollywood felt this was a time to take it to a higher level. And I think one of the key things about what these blockbusters do and what Godzilla also does, it attempts to tell a universal story. That by catering towards a global market is that everybody will be able to understand the story of Godzilla, the story of, let's say, wholesale global destruction, and everybody will have an opportunity to enter into it, as opposed to, let's say, something that is much more regional than national. And one of the key things is that blockbusters tend to, of this ilk, try to filter out contentious political content. One of the key trends is evolving, and particularly in relationship to China, is that Hollywood actually will vet their scripts by passing them to particular countries, such as China, to ensure that their films are going to be released. And that will actually strip out anything that could be controversial and actually something that is truly engaging at the social and political level. And finally, the morality of these films tends to be actually quite simple. If there's good versus evil, there is some kind of basic struggle that is going on, but what you don't get in these films is the spectra of morality that is much more gray, that people can be good and can be evil, that there is a mixed world of complexity, and you don't see that in these films. So that's the example from Hollywood. So what I would like to do is show the one from Bollywood. So we're going to see the trailer from Doom 3.
जो दुनिया को नामुमकिन लगे वही मौका होता है करतूत दिखाने का।
दो चोरी चोर दोनों बार हिंदी में लिख के गया, जोकर का मास्क छोड़ के। अगर उसे पकड़ना है तो हम उसे चोरी करवाएंगे। Face it, we make him rob again.
मस्खरा, मजाकिया, विदूषक, जोकर, क्लाउन, ये सब हमारे नाम हैं। लेकिन क्लाउन बनना सीरियस काम है, क्योंकि मस्खरे का खेल धोखे का खेल होता है, जिसमें ऑडियंस को लगता है कि जीत उनकी हो रही है, लेकिन जीतते हम हैं, हमेशा।
चोर और पुलिस की सिर्फ दुश्मनी होती है।
सर्कस वाला सिर्फ आंखों को नहीं, मौत को धोखा देते हैं रोज। मैं घर आ गया बाबा।
So, I think you get the gist of what that film is about if you haven't seen it. So what are the key features of Doom 3 and how does it illustrate some emerging patterns about Bollywood blockbusters? Well, first of all, what we can say that this film in particular, and perhaps other Bollywood action films, it really follows the formula of Hollywood action films. Secondly, if you look at the film itself, and even on the basis of the trailer, what you see, most of the film's references are more about Hollywood film as opposed to Bollywood film or Indian cinema more broadly. So I saw a bit of The Dark Knight, I saw Fast and Furious, I even saw a bit of Minority Report being referred to. Next, like a lot of Bollywood films that cater towards the Indian diaspora, it's set in exotic locations, and in this instance we see that there's a pivotal scene that's set in Chicago. And partly as a result of that, we get an increased use of English dialogue that is in the film. I'm aware that English has been in the Bollywood films for a while, but this is an increasing pattern. And finally, particularly with regard to the item numbers in the film, it relies upon an MTV video aesthetic. And we had little snippets of that in the film. So my prediction, and it's actually a prediction question because I may be wrong, is it's the Bollywood films, are they going to be dominated by these type of action films in the future, or are we going to still see that mix of other types like coming-of-age films, of more comedy romances with a bit of action thrown in?
I'd just like to quickly comment and then I'll come to you, Pooja. Yeah, I found it very interesting to see the item numbers. And you said that, yeah, it definitely has an MTV aesthetic. There's this woman and she's stripping and it's, you know, she's dressed in overalls, so it certainly has that MTV look. But then when you look at the Dabang item number, you'll see it's very Indian and with all the horrible vulgar lyrics, but she's extremely Indian, and there's, you know, all references to the, you know, murgi, what is it, tanduri murg hu, and you can gatkao fevicol say and things like that. So it has a very different Indian aesthetics. But so I have a feeling that there's going to be a balance of it. Somehow we've never really swung completely west. We are moving westwards, but I think there's going to be a strong set of, you know, very different kind of cinema that even in mainstream Bollywood that will cater to a very Indian aesthetic also. But it's always been mixed. And earlier, I just wanted to comment earlier, even in the early movies, they always would use one or two English words. So it'll just be daddy or mummy, or, you know, something like that. Or it would just be lovely. But now it's so much of the dialogue is in English. If you see Dhobi-Ghat, there's so much of it in English. If you see English-Vinglish, there's so much of it in English. And as you said, there are foreign locations. And I just wanted to make one comment about foreign locations, that it's part of the merchandising, which we can talk of later, but there's this movie, Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum. It started off with, you know, a location abroad, and actually it was a friend of ours who sold the idea to the producers and said, why don't you go and shoot abroad? And now, because of this globalization, we're having increasing trends of everyone shooting abroad. A large part of Dhoom was shot in Chicago. English-Vinglish was shot in New York, and, you know, and they have all these deals. So, Pooja, would you like to comment on this now?
So I think when you talk about item numbers, it's less of a musical component to it. It's more of the objectification of women, which sort of has always been a part of our cinema. It's just that at this point, it's got to a point where in a film like Dhoom 3, and, you know, one of the main actresses of the industry today, Katrina, if you'll agree with me, had pretty much 4 songs in the film. I mean, she barely had dialogue, and that was her job. And that again is following the pattern of Hollywood, because if you look at Fast and Furious, these characters literally don't exist in those films. And so for films that will follow that pattern, this will have to be. And even for films that don't follow that pattern, it's just essential to have that element because it's become the most important marketing vehicle. So it's got nothing to do with the context of the story, but it's still one of the most essential things. The other thing that I wanted to say was that even though objectification has reached this new high or low, what we have seen emerge in the recent days or years is actually female-centered roles, characters and content, whether English or Queen and Kahani, just a lot of these films, Dirty Picture, and it has both, elements of both sides. But it's really refreshing to see that there are audiences out there that will go and see these films without a big male leading the film, which was absolutely essential because in our market, we only sell on Shah Rukh film, Salman film, and that's just changing, and so hopefully changing for the better.
Yeah, I just would like to reinforce that because as many as we have the item numbers for sure, but the good thing is that we have a Dirty Picture, even though, of course, at the end of the day, we are not very happy with her sexuality, so she's punished and she has to commit suicide and stuff like that. But it's still something that's women-centric. And Queen, I would say, is extraordinary because it really talks about the assertion of a woman to be independent and have her own space. I think it's a very rare film, and I would give it credit for that. The item numbers, I just wanted to say we've always had cabarets, and they were integrated. In those days, it was the wicked women, the bad good girls or the bad girls that did it. Now we have the main actresses, the important actresses doing that. Then we also have them just the item number girls like Malika Sherawat and all of them. So it's a very new phenomenon in that sense. We began with the Choli Ke Piche, if all of you remember, with the innuendos and the songs, and then it's now moved into this. But the idea that there is going to be both kind of cinema is what I feel is going to happen. There's going to be a coexistence.
I entirely agree. And I think just the particular point, I don't think Hollywood has a monopoly, particularly when it comes to action films, that have progressive representations of women. So there's probably work to do on both fronts. So I would like to move on, because we talked about globalization and also its impact upon film text. I really want to move now to what the future is when it comes to distribution and exhibition. So the image that I have before you is a digital cinema package, which is basically a hard drive which the now films come when it's going to be digitally projected. Now, if you were going to come away with an image of what represents the future, this is the image that I would show you. This is what the film is going to be. It's no longer a strip of celluloid. It's now a box which has digits inside of it, and it doesn't have any of that iconic dimension that celluloid film has. So what is the impact upon this? And I want to give you a context of how did we get to this particular box containing a film. Well, first of all, the studio started moving to digital. So in 2012, Fox declared that it was no longer going to be releasing any of their films in 35mm print. As of 2012, half of the cinemas, commercial cinemas in the world, had become digital. There are major industry figures who are predicting by 2015 that 35mm prints will cease to be used for theatrical exhibition on a commercial basis. And this has created, I'm not going to get into the details, of a greater control over the way in which films are actually screened. So for instance, exhibitors have to enter in a code to actually release the film, and that is only released for a particular period of 1 or 2 weeks. Also, the digital cinema projector is connected to this huge network, and so the distributors could actually monitor if the film is being screened in that film and only that film. So what that entails is really a greater control of the distributors over exhibitors. And my question is, and it might be a bit of a prediction, is the same thing happening in India?
Yeah, could you talk about the digital revolution? Because we're all very upset. I remember we had a big, interesting debate when we met yesterday about the loss of 35 millimeter and the growth of digital. So you were very excited about the growth of the digital medium and the, all the opportunities that it gives us.
I'm not at all emotional about things that become archaic, to say the least. I mean, we lost Kodak film. We just take so many more selfies now. So this, for me, losing 35 is just a very efficient way of delivering content in a package that is secure, it's cheaper, it's faster, and anything that helps the industry to keep their costs down and still keep it safe, because this also helps with piracy, like we discussed. The film prints are not getting lost out of labs, and this is really the future of being able to control your product. And I think, from my perspective, there's nothing wrong in controlling the product. Yes, some of these studios will get even stronger, but they're already controlling the market with 80% of the market share for their top 10 films. So, one more way to cut the middlemen out at some point and reach the audience. More than theatrical, I'm very excited about the digital distribution platforms like iTunes and Netflix, and these are the platforms that we deliver content to that reach audiences here all the time, because now you're not even dependent on that one theater, 1 week, one location. You can get whatever you want to watch, whether it's Dhoom 3 or Kala Patthar, in any part of the world at any time of the day or night, and basically just watch it. And I think that ease of, experience that digital brings to the product opens up the market 1,000-fold, if not more. Content that was never able to see the light of day because theatrical was expensive, satellite was not an option, there were just no buyers in the market. We've seen some amazing films at the festivals that never got to the audiences, are now all coming out, and they're getting a life. And I think for me, digital plays that importance in being sort of the life breath of
There's
this.
also a lot of digital control. There are all these satellite deals that you spoke about Dharma and Yashraj and Excel having satellite deals. Could you elaborate about that, please?
I'm checking if there's anybody from there here. It's just
With
that our
Viacom
content
and
windows
Sony, yeah.
are very stringent. When you make a movie, it plays in a theater, and then post-theatrical release, it has to play on your satellite, whether it's a Sony or a Star. And these linear channels control the audiences in the households today. So when you have an option to watch it on iTunes, it's not really in their interest, because that's competition for their eyeballs. They're losing their ratings when they do their big premieres. So they're sort of holding back on allowing the digital to grow at a speed that it's meant to. Now, this was maybe a year ago, but what started happening in the last year, they've realized that they can't stop it. And then piracy is playing a very important role, because with the digital experience of being able to get when you want something, if it's not available legally now, we know where to go get it. So they've realized that they'll have to change these windows. They will have to start investing in digital. A lot of these platforms have now come up with their own digital properties, whether it's an Eros Now or a Sony Live, and they distribute digitally. So they're still controlling in a way, or they will buy digital rights from the producer, so the producer cannot exploit them, but they can then be into that line. So overall, we can't fight, how the system was made, but when new technology comes, it will change a few things.
I would just like to intervene at this point of time to talk about the global control that's happening in the media, where we know that there are just a few media companies that are controlling things globally, worldwide. There's Disney, there's News Corp, 21st Century Fox, Time Warner, CBS Corp, Viacom, Comcast, and Sony. And now India has come up with Reliance. Reliance has Reliance DreamWorks, Reliance Big Entertainment, Reliance Digital, and so on. So now Reliance is getting into this global top market. And the impact that it's having on merchandising. My students and I, we went to see Shaadi Ke Side Effects, and there were an amazing number of products that were advertised in the movie. I don't know, some Bacardi to some scooter and Royal Enfield and Bacardi and Samsung and Volkswagen and a whole heap more. And I just wanted to add that this control is really frightening in a way, because there's this big synergy between theater, news, television, the content that's coming on websites. So it's like, you know, as Ben Bagdikian says, is it really something that we think that we're watching what we're asking for? And I'm just quoting here from Ben Bagdikian. Just give me a second. I'm just trying to hunt for the quote. Yeah. This is what happens with The Lion King. When Disney produces a film, it can also guarantee the film showings on pay cable TV, commercial network television. It can produce and sell soundtracks based on the film. It can create spin-off series. It can produce related amusement park rides, CD-ROMs, books, comics, and merchandises to be sold in Disney retail stores. Moreover, Disney can promote the film and related material incessantly across all its media properties. Disney's Lion King earned over $3 million at the box office and guaranteed over $1 billion in profit for Disney through the merchandise. The synergies do not end with the media. Time Warner, Universal, Disney all have theme parks. Likewise, Time Warner, Disney, Viacom all have chains of retail stores to capitalize upon their media brands. So are we really getting what we ask for? And as, you know, I mean, somehow, is there this huge big thing that's controlling things, or is there also space for other independent? Because if the independent movie wants to make it, it's really tough.
Well, that's a perfect way to introduce my next topic, which has to do with independent cinema, because there's many of you, no doubt, feel that they have a hunger for more than just simply blockbusters, something that portrays humanity in a way that is much more identifiable with your own conditions. And so why don't we look at a couple examples of that. And my talk with respect to these sets of points really has to do with barriers of entry. How are things changing that will allow independent filmmakers make films that are more engaging than let's say the lost audience that blockbusters represents. So this example is actually a British independent film. It was made for about £500,000. It's called Monsters, but it actually earned over $2 million. And I think the key thing about it was that it was made on prosumer cameras. They're more middle range. They're not the top-end red cameras or digital Panavision cameras. There's also increasingly, I find, with the impact of YouTube, that people are no longer looking for really super high production values, that they're happy to watch a film that doesn't necessarily have all of its money on screen, that really what they're more interested in is looking at how actors perform and the quality of the story. And as a result of that emphasis, there's an increasing trend within alternative cinema that we're not talking about indie films that are on the 5 million bracket. We're talking about ones that are less than $1 million or even on a few £1,000s. And a lot of that is driven by technology and the cost of actually using that being driven downwards. And so I want to turn to my next example. Is an example from Indian cinema. This is August 2. This film only cost 300,000 rupees to make. It was again shot on a prosumer camera, mid-digital range, only had a crew of one person, the director, the screenwriter, the editor, and most importantly, the film didn't have any visual effects. Didn't have a big gigantic budget to support it. What it did was it focused upon actors, it focused upon performances, and it focused upon stories that related to people, and so that the audiences could identify. And is now the trend with independent cinema. It was released online, and it got a lot of critical recognition, and it was selected from the Indian Independent Film Festival. So my prediction is, and this kind of relates to previous discussion, is the future of independent cinema, is it now going to be on digital platforms, or is there any space in terms of theatrical exhibition anymore?
Well, I think this Indian cinema, or the independent Indian cinema as we call it, has really come a long way in the last 10 years. 10 years ago, there was absolutely no opportunity for these films to get seen. And it was just really sad to see filmmakers making amazing content that couldn't reach audiences. 5, 10, 15, 20 festivals with 200 people, and that was it. And that's really where we started this online distribution to get these films out. A film like Sita Sings the Blues, which went to 200 festivals then and has been selling till now, 10 years later, is one of the best sellers. And I tell everybody to watch it. It's free on YouTube. But now where we have reached with people like Guneet Monga and Anurag Kashyap, who've become brand ambassadors of this line of cinema and have actually created a spot for these films by actually, genuinely holding these filmmakers' hands to teach them not just the craft but the business. How do you make a film that goes to Cannes? What do you have to do to premiere at Venice? And it's not about stars, it's about the content. And this is still not your mainstream content. It's still not going to have the numbers that we see for a Dhoom 3. But the fact that Lunchbox today is the highest grossing foreign film in US, it's made $4 million, is not something that I ever expected anything coming out of India from the independent scene. That film has 10 producers attached to it. It had 10 markets pre-sold. By the time it reached Cannes, it already had a Sony Pictures Classic, vying for it. It's opened in 120 territories, and somebody should do a case study on how did they break that down and how did they get that, because I think everything was done right. I don't think it's such an exceptional project that cannot repeat what happened. Same thing, there was a film called Peddlers that was in Cannes 2 years ago. Eros bought the film, but they didn't know what to do with it. They couldn't even put it on their own Eros Now platform that they own, forget about theatrical or satellite. And it's just been sitting. So now we're working with these filmmakers to do a global release of these films on these platforms. For example, the last film, 1x2, which released in theaters here, we released it on Facebook the same Friday. So this day and date film reached all over the world for fans that wanted to see it, and it really controlled piracy, for one. Gave revenue which was higher than the theatrical for that film in the first month itself. And the fact that the stars could engage with, people all over the world who were watching it, and Facebook. You don't need platforms, you don't need an iPhone, you don't need anything. It's on every device. So it's becoming that easy, but marketing is going to play a very key role to bring these audiences close to it.
I think there is, quite a lot happening there, because there's been support for even small budget films. I think Queen was also a small budget film. And then one unusual film that Kiran Rao supported hugely and became a success was Ship of Theseus. Of course, it was a foreign production, but Anand Gandhi is Indian, and it was a most unusual film, and to have it hit the market, to have it be distributed was quite something. And in the context of films that are really unusual, I'd like to mention Fandry, which we spoke about. Fandry is very unusual. It's been made by a Dalit. I don't think that film would have been possible several years ago, and the fact that it's got these international awards, the fact that it's been shown at film festivals abroad. Fandry means wild pig. It's a term which is used in Kaikidi. Kaikidi is the language that they speak. It's similar to Kannada, and the director Nagaraj Manjule comes from the family of Vadars. They are stone cutters. And he actually talks about this experience of, they were humiliated, they were trying to catch wild pigs. Now, the fact that there's this young boy, he comes out of that place, he comes out of the village, he comes and studies in Pune, and he makes this film, is quite a story, and then it gets distributed all over the world, is an amazing story. So there are these wonderful independent movies that are being made. And of course, the alternatives to mainstream cinema, I'd like to introduce the documentaries, which are very unusual, because now we're having documentaries that are actually very interesting in terms of their content. They're actually screening in mainstream theaters. So it started off with Madhushri Datta's 7 Islands and a Metro. No, Anand Patwardhan's War and Peace. And more documentary filmmakers are realizing that they can make really entertaining and gripping documentaries. Recently we had Fire in the Blood showing. That was a commercial release. Celluloid Man was a commercial release. Miriam Chandy's Rat Race. Faiza Khan's Superman of Maligaon. That they actually get a release in multiplex theaters is quite something. And that's an unusual trend. And there are two which are unusual because we're talking about item numbers on one hand, but we've got two extraordinarily good documentaries which are very strongly feminist in nature. One is Gulabi Gang, which has been made by Nishtha Jain, and it's about these women who wear pink saris in Bundelkhand, and they go and they, they take sticks and they threaten to beat up men who are abusing their wives or who are burning their wives for dowry. It's an amazing movement. And then there's a wonderful film by Deepa Dhanraj, which is called Invoking Justice. It's about a group of women that form an all-women's Jamaat. It's in the south, and it's Muslim. Normally, the male members would organize the, justice. But here it's about these women who are actually, there's 12,000 members across 12 districts settling over 8,000 cases. Now, these kind of documentaries are getting commercial releases. And we couldn't have possibly imagined that some years ago. So there's, a lot of scope for that.
If you see, PVR Directors Rare started the program to bring these films to theatres, then Anupama Chopra is doing her.
Yes.
And when people like Kiran Rao and Karan Johar back these films, then it actually gives it a bit of a push to the mainstream to, highlight them in the right way. So that's great that the stalwarts of Bollywood are actually encouraging this cinema as much as the independents.
About crowdsourcing, can you talk a little bit about that? Because just to introduce it, Spike Lee raised 1.4 million. So can you talk about the controversy and crowdsourcing?
Yeah, certainly. So on the theme of barriers to entry, clearly one was production costs, and now these are lowering, which facilitates independent filmmakers to make greater range of films. But there also is another significant barrier, which is financing. So in terms of funding, what the model is in terms of financing is that you create a community of like-minded fans, and they are willing to contribute to the funding of that film. I mean, this is not only simply in terms of films, but it could be in terms of bands or other types of projects that are done. And usually the medium of this, and this is because it's more of a digital age, is online platforms. So we're talking about Indiegogo, we're talking about Kickstarter, and I'll give you one particular example, is that my colleague, Freya Billington, she teaches film production back at my university, and she shot a film in South Africa. It followed the story of this South African, and the film's called How Lucky. And she didn't have sufficient funds to do the remaining editing, to get the final release print. So she went to Kickstarter, she got all the funding, and part of that campaign, and it's what's in the image, is that anybody who made a particular contribution, let's say 10 pounds or 15 pounds, they would get a free t-shirt. Now the other dimension of that, in terms of, and it's kind of like a parallel development in terms of crowdfunding, is crowdsource exhibition. And this is quite a more recent development. And the idea is, again, to match filmmakers, independent filmmakers, with a particular set of films, and then what it is that the viewers will actually vote, yes, I would like to watch that film. And if they reach a certain threshold of votes for the films, then the actual distributor will arrange to have a local screening. So to give it, and again, these are online platforms. So one example of a type of platform of this is Open Indie. It actually was created by my PhD student. He got involved, and one of the pivotal films that was released on this platform is called w.r.t. Again, a small, more intimate production that actually gives chances for filmmakers to actually have a theatrical release where probably they never would have that opportunity. So my question is, given the developments of crowdfunding and given this new trends of crowdsourced theatrical, do you think that this is now going to be a new future for independent cinema, or again, are the Hollywood conglomerates going to buy into it and control it?
That was my question for you, actually, because Spike Lee raised 1.4 million from 6,421 backers in August 2013 to make a feature film that as of April 2014 is not titled. And the film will feature actors Stephen Tyrone Williams, Zara Abrahams, Michael K. Williams. So yes, there's, the notion that Bollywood, Hollywood will also start funding like this. Who knows? But still, I feel that crowdsourcing is the answer today. I know that many of my students who are young independent filmmakers have put in their own money and got funding from crowdsourcing. And it is the festivals that have helped them really to move ahead. So I was wondering, Pooja, if you could talk about the role of film festivals, because I think that's really critical and crucial in today's time. And they're all tiny festivals all over. And I just want to mention one festival. There's a Kashish Film Festival. We're talking about alternative sexuality. There's a lot of that in the movies today as well. Or maybe that's Western trend, globalization, I don't know. And one of my students' films, she's here today, it's going to be screened at the Kashish Film Festival. So now can you talk about film festival?
Congratulations, first of all. It's a long journey. Not all festivals get to be in front of an audience that actually is looking for them. So it's a landmark to get there, but really it's not a means to an end. Crowdsourcing, first of all, I just want to say has already come here. There's some Indian platforms as well that are geared towards content from India. But mostly crowdsourcing in India is happening for a cause. It won't happen for a Pebble watch. It'll happen to save the girl child in Ladakh. So if your film is based on a social concept, there is a possibility that you'd be successful. Not for commercial cinema. That would have to come from an investor that wants to double or triple their money. The festival route was really just to give a platform for a lot of filmmakers that really were doing compelling work and just couldn't get through. And at that time, Tribeca's and Sundance were not really aware that there is a wave of cinema coming from India. Now they all do, and which is amazing. But 10 years ago, we started this, and while everybody wanted to see Meera Nair and Deepa Mehta's Water and Namesake and all these films, every now and then you came across a gem like a Sita or a Frozen that people would want to just applaud but couldn't even share with their friends. And come 5 years, 7 years later, one of my friends, Rishi Mehta, who did a film called Amal, which was in the Toronto Festival, and now he just finished a second film called Siddharth, actually got acquired by Zeitgeist for US territory out of a New York Indian festival, not a Tribeca, not a Sundance. So I think the buyers have actually woken up post all the good content going to Cannes, Venice, that they know that there's good content coming. There are markets for that content. We've kind of broken that first gap, and now the festivals are becoming a very important point to move the business of this content, not just exhibition, which is very exciting.
Before I sum up, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Well, there was one thing, and I think, Jeroo, you anticipated me because I know it's dear to your heart, which is documentary. We're going to be talking about alternative filmmaking. Documentary is now one of its major forms, and I think it's increasingly so. So the last thing I want to end on is that I had mentioned about Hollywood films increasingly apolitical, and where can you find the political in cinema anymore? And my answer is actually it's documentary film. And I think as a result of the fact that you're going to watch films that are entertainment, and that's their principal function, where is it that you could actually raise significant important issues pertaining to gender, pertaining to class, pertaining to the economic disparities in the social world. So the two examples that I wanted to point out actually relate to a very pressing issue, which is sustainability. So here's an example. The American one is Gasland. It looks at fracking, the extraction of gas and all the dangers that are involved in it, and the difficulty in which to get some kind of true answers. And the other example is an Indian example, a recent one called Katibaz, and it's about electricity and power cuts and having a politically interventionist stance towards that. So the way that I would like to end it is that your views is, does documentary represent the political cinema of the future, and do you actually see that growing in terms of demand?
I certainly think that that's the one space that currently is free, And I would like to share this little experience with you that once upon a time we had a wonderful festival, we still do, called Mumbai International Film Festival, but then they started to censor documentaries. So then a group of us got together, and it was spearheaded by my student and several others, Anand included, and they began something called Vikalp. So one of my students, Paramita, she runs Vikalp. It's an alternative because the government wanted to censor documentaries. It was the single space that was free of censorship. And I thought that was very important. And the fact that, yes, there are these political documentaries, people are dying to see an alternative point of view. People, I don't think, want to, it says here that a whole generation has forgotten that the public owns the airwaves, but I think the public is trying to reclaim spaces. And they do want to see those documentaries. And there's this Gargi Sen who distributes with Magic Lantern. So I think that, yes, I fully agree with you that that's the space now left for political comment. Because outside the documentary space and small budget cinema, I think there are a lot of independent films also that try to make very strong political comments. So yes, that's where it is. So Pooja, would you like to make any comment before I wind up? No. Okay, so I'd just like to summarize quickly that we went from really like big budget, computer generated images, the really big stuff, which of course dominates the market. We are living in a globalized market-driven world, but hopefully there are spaces where we can assert ourselves and we can have some serious thought, and that can come through in independent cinema, avant-garde cinema, cinema that is different, unusual, creative, and politically alive. Thank you. And now we open it up to the audience.
We'd just like to request, please please keep your questions really short and to the point, not too long and commentish. And
what she means is don't make statements.
Don't make statements,
questions.
yeah. And we have two team members. You could just raise your hands if you want to ask a question.
Yeah, please
ask. Yeah, good evening.
Yeah.
Madam, for spaces for cinema, why don't we use trains, buses, cars, company buses and travel buses so that short films can be shown there? Why not use terraces, parks, gardens, playgrounds, mollahs, mandals and church groups? And madam, why not mobile channels and connectors? And one more thing, crowdfunding. Why not take money from shopkeepers, traders, hawkers, offices, malls and industries, and CSR 2% for this?
I get your point. Yes, actually there are theatres all over the world. They're screening films in all kinds of places and areas and zones and mobile vans. And in fact, in India, we've always had a tradition of taking films out to the public. IPTA started that, then we've got mobile vans. In fact, in the old days, films were always shown in tents. Now we're going back to that. And there's so many places where films are screened in buses and so on, and there's a whole movement in the south, in Thiruvananthapuram, where they take, you know, they show it anywhere. Magic Lantern also does that. Gargi Sen shows her films in crowded areas. Anand takes his films and shows them in slum areas. So it is very prevalent, and I think you also have some examples.
Well, I think the perfect examples is we're still using the model of exhibition, of, you know, a screen, but really what we're talking about in terms of the future is a generation of youth who are watching films not in theaters, but actually on their mobiles, on their smartphones, on their tablets. So anytime that I go on a train to London, what I see is a whole bunch of people watching video content and media content. So what I see, that is actually almost a universal expression of consumption of media, consumption of films in a ready, accessible way in virtually any kind of context or environment. That might be different from, let's say, my generation, where my model of going to the cinema is to watch a film, or at second best to watch it in my home cinema. But that's not the majority anymore. They watch films on their computers and on their tablets.
Any other question? Yeah, there's a question.
Hi. I noticed that the agenda of financing films is cause, finance, gender issues, sex, and there seems to be a hidden agenda, and connected with festivals And the festivals seem to not give the space for serious thinkers when there are individuals who analyze the root of the problems, and there are many who are on YouTube. But I never get to see those kind of people talking in the film festivals, which is actually a placebo kind of a effect which the coordinators are giving to the masses, deciding for them, judging for them, but not giving the space to the people who are the analyzers, thinkers, and people who make people think. So what about doing a festival? What about giving a platform in the open, rather than all of us watching on YouTube and selectively? What about talking truth and talking honestly, rather than giving these, I prefer the green nail polish to the blue nail polish kind of, choices to the masses? So what about doing some serious stuff? Is anybody thinking of this? Thank you.
Pooja.
You stay here, I presume, right? I can't comment on what happens with the festivals here. I think Jeroo's already mentioned there's censorship, there's agendas, there's
Not
different...
anymore.
Well, not anymore. I'm sure there are alternate places, but back in the United States, I think you should come and visit one of the, amazing documentary festivals. One of them is called Hot Docs that just finished. In fact, two of the top 3 winners were Indian subjects. They will give a voice to anything that is, content rich and also done well. So those 2 things play a very critical role when you're picking something for a festival. Also, each audience of a festival is different. When you belong to an audience of a festival, you're telling them what you're looking for. So they're taste makers. They're going to cater to the taste of their audiences. You have to probably look and find better platforms or festivals that are not scared to show the truth.
I would suggest you go to FD Zone. They are fantastic films that my students have organized over there every Saturday. They have really wonderful films, and Vikalp is another wonderful area, and now they're planning to open FD Zones across metros. And I'm really proud that it's my students who are opening up all these spaces. And another thing is that I also want to share that abroad they have wonderful festivals. My students did a fabulous film on labor, which may or may not have got, except for these small little venues, wouldn't get a distribution. But it won an award at Leipzig because they had it only on labor. And they have wonderful festivals. The Jean Rouge Festival is only on anthropology, only on very unusual topics. So yes, there are spaces for those kind of things, but yes, it's very tiny, very limited, but the spaces are there. There's a question there. Could you give the mic to that gentleman there? He has a question.
Can I ask? Yeah.
I'll take yours later.
All right.
While talking about documentaries, I just wanted to know whether the audience is slightly wider on the international segment or it's widening in the Indian segment. That's my question. Like when we talk about documentaries in particular, like when we are talking about documentary filmmaking, is there a wider audience internationally, or the Indian angle is widening at this point of time with the kind of documentaries that are now coming up?
Well, I guess I could only talk about my own particular experience. I think that my small knowledge of Indian documentary indicates that I want to watch more of it, that it's actually quite engaged, that it's quite rich, and that it holds its own with American documentary, with French documentary, and basically world documentary. However, is there enough exposure of Indian documentary? No, that's not the case. So I think the solution to that is to have really kind of more specialist distributors. It could be a particular DVD line that specializes in world documentaries and not rely upon historically all of the American documentarists getting the lion's share of the attention. And so, and particularly given the fact of how important India is in terms of its global position, in terms of its cultural diversity, I think there should be a platform to see more of it.
I'd just like to add that it totally depends upon what the content is. Is it something that they can relate to? Is it something that they're curious about? Or is it something that's entertaining? These three things can definitely get you onto a platform. One of the best-selling documentaries was Spelling Bee, about little children, competing for the award of the spelling contest. And it made, I don't remember the numbers at the top of my head, but it transformed. It went from that documentary space to an entertainment. But at the same time, something like Girl Rising has seen exceptional theatrical numbers. There is a culture of documentary viewing abroad, which I think because of access is absent here. There is definitely a requirement, but I think more people who make documentaries or have causes that they support have that interest in it, but not really mainstream.
I can only say one thing, that I've seen the documentary movement grow in India, undoubtedly. We started out about 30 years ago, it wasn't so much, but it's really, really grown, and more women are taking up to documentaries, and I think that's because of the advantage of digital. It's lightweight, it's easy, you don't have to worry about footage and so on. So technology also has had a role to play in that. There's a question there.
As we are talking about the future cinema, I just want to ask you that, like nowadays we are having only animated films. In future, we will have only animated. Will we find the real characters?
Well, it's an interesting question. There is a theorist called Lev Manovich, and his thesis is that film is actually a subcategory of animation. That live action filming is only a small part of what you could include in terms of animation, which is really the free creation of an image. If you treat an image as a canvas, you don't have to have the source. By pointing a camera on reality, you could create it almost with a digital pen, or how earlier animation would draw it by hand. I think there is some element of truth to that. But if you're talking about the extreme direction of seeing that there's not going to be any more human beings, there's just going to be digital actors, I would say no. The principal reason why people go to the cinema, this is my theory, is because they want to feel emotion. And the only way that you could really feel emotion if there's a person and a human being in front of you. And if you take that out, if you have something that is much more mediated, then I think then people will stop going to the cinema. And I guess the reason, like you think about animation such as Toy Stories, Pixar films, the reason why we engage with them is because there's human voices behind them. And it's the quality of their voice that is able to produce a personality that the viewer can envision and imagine. So I don't see that day coming anytime soon.
Just to comment on animation films, of course, the animation films are hugely capital intensive. So you can either have a state government support it, as in the case of Russian animation films and all the satellite countries in East Europe, or you can have a Walt Disney support it. But there's again a space for unusual animated films, and my friend Gitanjali Rao has made a very, very beautiful, The Printed Rainbow. The Printed Rainbow. It's a very beautiful film. She's made another one just now which won the national award. And they're very beautiful films, and they're full of emotions. They're very, very beautiful films. But again, very difficult for her to get funding, very difficult for her to, get those films out. But there is a space for animation films that do have a strong human emotional content. Yes, there's a question there.
Having spoken about cinema and documentaries, how do you all see the short film market grow? I mean, in India and globally, do you think there is a market that's growing? Of course it is, but where do you all see it go?
Pooja?
I think short films have taken over the internet. YouTube is here today because of short form content and also because of mobile. And I think in our country, there are companies that are creating original programming in short form and mostly, narrative that are completely able to reach their users very efficiently. Now, will there be a business model to this? It's a tough question. If you're making a film that goes to a festival, you'll probably have to look at an anthology that's looking to put together a series of shorts and then release them, because individually people are still not purchasing shorts. They feel like shorts is something they should see free. That's just a behavior thing, and I think it'll take a while. But I know one of these actors, Avid Idealogy, is actually putting together a shorts brand. He wants to be the brand ambassador for short films out of India, and he's going to be releasing short films on his Facebook page. So he's kind of curating and putting together a movement for short filmmakers. So you should reach out to him.
There's definitely a rise in short films, because I was in the selection committee for the Mumbai International Film Festival, and to my horror, actually, I saw hundreds of terrible short films. But it indicated something very nice. It indicated that there were just so many people wanting to make short films. They were really ghastly, and we had to check out all of them. But the good thing was that there's an entire section on short films, and some of them were really nice, unusual, and different. So I think it's going to grow.
There's, I think, parallel to sort of like the neglect of the, let's say, the commercial value of short films. I think there's a parallel in terms of there's an academic neglect with film studies and within media studies of the value of short films. So within all of English language film studies, I have found, and I'm only aware of one journal that actually treats it as a significant art form. This is, to a certain extent, strange, because we all recognize the short story as being proper form of literature. So why can't the short form be so? And I think it has to do with prejudices, is that one thinks of the short film as student films. And one thinks that it's a form where a filmmaker cuts their teeth to make the feature-length film. I think that it shouldn't be seen that way, that you could tell a very engaging, a very moving and powerful film that could be only 10 minutes long.
Yeah.
35 millimeter film is a beautiful thing.
Yes.
Because it's like human chemistry. It has emulsion, it registers light in a very different way. So do you think it will be completely obsolete, because it's still considered a very professional standard, and especially for 65 millimeter?
I can only say I hope not. I hope it continues. I'm a great sort of believer in the emulsion and old film. But I think it'll come through in works of art. Not so much in the commercial areas, and I think that there will be a survival, a little bit of both. But the sad news is that I know that Kodak has stopped manufacturing film, right? So, yeah. Could you talk about that?
I don't think it'll totally go away. I know 2015 is the, big thing hanging. Even a filmmaker like Zoya Akhtar, who's making her next film, she's shooting half digital and half film. And if anybody's done that, you know just how difficult it is going to be at color correction. But all her outdoors is shot on 35, all her indoors is shot on digital. There are filmmakers who refuse to accept that there's an end date to this. And I think as long as there is a critical amount of demand and resistance from the filmmakers, we might be able to push that date out by a decade, but there is going to be an end date on it, unfortunately.
I know for sure in photography, there are a lot of photographers who are using really old formats. In fact, they're even using the, not just the square format, those old plates. Exactly. So they're working on that. So it is, I don't think that filmmakers will also let go so easily.
Well, I think it's part of any kind of new technological development has to be legitimated, and there's an ideology behind digital that this is the best, this is the way going forward, you're entering into a more immersive reality, and that celluloid is now the history. But we know that's not the case. I mean, a perfect example is not simply photography, where professional photographers want to use 35 to create their work, but we could think about music. You know, I listened to music in the 1970s on a record player, and we know full well that it's still around. So I'm positive that there will still be filmmakers who want the properties of celluloid because they want to actually use those to create a particular vision.
I'll just add to that, I have very engaging conversation with Kumar Shani, one of the avant-garde filmmakers in India, and he is a great believer in cinema. I mean, the film as a medium, celluloid. and he would never let his films be shown on digital. And the other thing is, he said it's like analog and digital music. We all want to go not just back, not even to stereo, but to mono recordings. So, you know, there are people who are really very committed to that. Yeah, it's archival. So actually, that's another area of interest, just a question and a thought. When we start to preserve films and do archiving and all of that, which, by the way, Reliance is also doing, what are we doing when we're archiving? We're archiving digital material. Is it really the original? Because the 35 millimeter was the original, or the 70 was the original. But when we convert it to digital, are we really preserving the original, or what is it that we're preserving? It's just a debate that goes on in archival
It's like
circles.
your scanned photographs from the past, you know. At least you'll be able to see them 20 years later.
Well, I agree with that, but on the other hand, I think there's certain dangers. And I think a lot of film archivists are worried, and it's basically the obsolescence of digital technology and how quick it's going. Try to play, let's say, an early 1980s Nintendo game. Where are you going to get the computer that's able to play that? Think about 200 years from now, 100 years from now. What type of computer or machine could actually play the digital files that now exist? And film archivists are seriously worried about that the whole past might be lost. And there's certain archivists who are actually saving their films in 35.
I promise you, anybody who's getting nostalgic about losing the old school, I promise you in about 10 years, digital will reach and technology will reach a place where not only will you be holding a digital photograph that will feel exactly like the old one, but it'll probably talk to you too.
Well, then it's not the old one.
Any more questions?
Are there any more questions? Yeah, there's one more.
Yeah, hi. I recently read an interview by Steven Spielberg, and he communicated his paranoia that after his film Lincoln won the Oscars, he confessed that it was very, very difficult for him to first get it made into a feature film. He was forced to make it into HBO miniseries. Then he was had to face a lot of objection to get a theatrical release. He says that the surge in summer blockbusters is going to make Hollywood implode in itself. I want to know how justified his paranoia is.
Well, I think one of the things I tried to convey, and I should have perhaps picked out better, is all of the biggest blockbusters date from only past 2 or 3 years. I think the only exception was Titanic, which dates from 1997. And even if you adjust in terms of inflation and you adjust in terms of real terms, what that tells me is that Hollywood blockbusters are alive and that they're going to continue because they are still generating a huge amount of money. I think what the implosion is that is going to occur is not going to be a financial implosion. It's going to be an implosion of meaning. It's going to be an implosion of social relevance. And people will eventually want something that's a little bit more. And so what that entails is that there's going to be, at a parallel time, there is going to be increasing demand for something that is relevant. My reaction of watching a blockbuster is saying, yeah, that was fantastic, that was great CGI, but I will forget about it instantly because it will have no relevance to my life.
So, content-driven drama, would it still get theatrical release in the future, or would it be limited to digital platforms and more intimate way of viewing these dramas?
Well, probably Jeroo.
If it's Spielberg, he'll get it. But
he faced difficulty in 2012 to release
exactly.
Lincoln.
So
you know?
That's what I was trying to say earlier too, that the big Hollywood format or that pattern is going to become synonymous with the theatrical release, or even a 3D release, or even bigger than 3D that we don't know right now. But the human stories and the dramas are not going to become that much more important to go and see in a theater. They're going, and you know what, our screens are going to go from 90 to 120, and we're going to have these theaters at home, and you're going to be able to see them at home, and you won't want to go to a theater. The theater is going to cost about 10 times too. So how many movies can you actually go out and see today in a theater? Not many. So you're going to have to choose between a Godzilla or a Lincoln. You're going to say, I'm going to see Godzilla on screen and I'm going to see Lincoln at home.
All right. Any more questions? Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tico, Pooja, and Jeroo for this very, very interesting talk. And thank you all, to all of you audiences. I'd also like to thank Dr. Alka Pandey, who's actually introduced Avid to Dr. Tico Romao and has facilitated this happening. We are celebrating cinema this entire month, and we have a fabulous screenwriting workshop this weekend with a young and very talented Bollywood, or should I say emerging cinematic director and writer, Satyanshu Singh. He's just won the National Award for his first film. And if you want to map his mind and his route to very quick success, then please do come. You can pick up flyers and more information at the reception desk. Also, next month, we'll be having our next ideology event, this time on a different topic, possibly economic constructs. We promise that as we go along, our conversations and interactions are going to get a little more controversial to bring you new insights. So once again, thank you and look forward to seeing you again. Take care.